We've been talking so much about the who in the secondary and whether or not we trust this guy or that guy, but not so much about the what they will actually be doing. So here's a guide to Brian Flores' coverage schemes here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. This is something that we do just about every offseason here on Locked On Vikings, where we kind of dump the playbook, best I know it. It's a good kind of preparation thing, as camp is coming sooner than later, and there's going to be preseason games. And the thing about preseason games is they will show you the most vanilla versions of all this, and then all the little wrinkles and tweaks and alignment things and all the fancy schmancy stuff that really makes Brian Flores' defense sing will not get revealed until actual games are played. But you're going to see the shells. So this is how I'm going to structure this today. I want to start with the shells, the actual coverage, like the best way I know to categorize it, and help explain to you a way to sort of shortcut it to understand what happens when you take a player out of that coverage and blitz them, which happens a lot with Flores, right? Then we'll talk about the jobs within those shells and the actual things those players do and how mixing and matching that can create that famous illusion of complexity that McVay coaches always talk about. And then if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about what they do when they are in man coverage, which isn't as common, but the way that they're their kind of version of man coverage, this like off man sort of, heels in the ground blitz coverage that they do. Which is also really important to talk about. But first, let's just go over the shells. And they run the same shells as everybody else. You will very rarely see any coverage in any NFL game that isn't cover 1, which is man coverage, cover 3, cover 2, or cover 4. Or you can call it 6 as a mix and match between 2 and 4. But 1, 2, 3, 4. Like a half of the field is one and a half of the field is the other. And that is pretty much universal. So I'm not getting rid of any state secrets. And it's funny, people always get a little anxious whenever I do this. I promise you, okay, if Johnny Podcaster over here can figure it out, I'm not giving up anybody that any random QC coach that's been doing this for 3 months can't also figure out, okay? But if you are unfamiliar, let's go over the basics of those shells real quick. Cover 1, 1 deep safety, man coverage, not a lot to say about that. Cover 3 deep safeties, 4 underneath zones. We'll talk about what those zones actually are and how they kind of differ and what they require of the player depending on where that player is coming from. Just put a pin in that. But these are all just named after how many deep zones there are. Cover 3 deep zones. Cover 2 deep zones. Cover 4 deep zones. Easy enough, right? And if you imagine 7 people in coverage, whoever's left over is underneath. So in cover 2, you've got 2 deep zones, you've got 5 underneath zones. So cover 2 can be a really useful play call in situations like 3rd and 4, when you feel like they're going to be trying to throw toward the sticks and you want to have a lot of extra help in that kind of shallow, quick pass range, and sort of dare them to go deep on 3rd and 2 like they're not supposed to, right? Cover 4 is the opposite. If you're worried about them going deep, put more deep zones in there. Yeah, you're going to be a little bit shorthanded underneath, but you'll call that in situations where you're all right with that. Or maybe you'll live in that if you think you're really good. Quarters itself in the Belichick tree world, which Brian Flores still uses these principles, is kind of its own beast with lots of little adjustments. The way I like to think about quarters is everyone's got their sort of baseline idea, which is like where you end up once you've gone through the read that you're supposed to go through. So with like true, man match cover 7, like Mike Zimmer style, basically, it would be, the safety would have 2-to-1 robber, right? Where you would look at the second receiver from the outside, and then you'd look at the first receiver from the outside. So the inner guy and then the outer guy, that would be, your eyes would follow that pattern, and whichever one comes vertical, you take. So if the 2 comes vertical, you take him. If he doesn't come vertical, you look at the 1. If he's vertical, you take him. If neither of those guys are vertical, you go to robber, and you look to the other side of the field and see if you can like jump a route and try to get an interception. And vertical, by the way, the definition of vertical doesn't mean literally just a go route. It means, do they run, the actual yardage will vary scheme to scheme, but like, do they run more than 7 yards? If their route stem is more than 7 yards before it breaks, it's now a vertical route and it counts as your job. And then you just play man coverage against that. That's kind of how cover 4 can work. In like a Fangio style system, like the Ed Donatel or the literal Fangio one that just won the Super Bowl, if you want one that actually worked, they will zone it off a little bit more and they'll still try to play tight to routes, but it's much more hip square, eyes to the quarterback, find your landmark where you're supposed to go, and then adjust that landmark based on the route you think you're going to get. So your eyes are still trying to be aware, and part of the reason the Donatel stuff didn't work is because he was asking eyes to do too much. You'd look at the quarterback and then the route and then back to the quarterback, and by the time you were actually able to make a decision, it was too late, and you weren't able to get out to the to the landmark you were supposed to get, which is why that defense suddenly fell all the way apart, even though it was largely the same group of people that was playing all right for Zimmer for all those years. But I'm getting distracted. So you can think of those basic coverage shells. We'll get into more detail later. But really, I think what defines the Flores system is the zone coverages behind the blitzing. Traditional wisdom is that it's really hard to play zone coverage and blitz at the same time because zone coverage is so meticulously spaced that taking one of those zones away and throwing them toward the quarterback is just a big giant red flag pointing exactly at where the quarterback is supposed to throw, and he's just going to go throw to that vacated zone. So you had to find a different way to do things. Most teams, and I still think that this is true, don't quote me on it because I'm not nearly as intimately familiar with other defenses, but I still think you're probably going to find the vast majority of blitzes, the coverage is paired with man coverage. So just, hey, 5-on-5 guys, and then we can send 6 blitzers. And it's a little risky because if someone loses their assignment, it's a completion, but they only have to hold up for so long. It's kind of the devil's bargain that you make. This is Flores' idea. Flores says, no, I want to have access to zone. I want to be able to keep things in front, force teams to dump the ball underneath, and then I can rally and tackle, and your whole pass game is 2 yards at a time, and you're going to punt. And that's like the whole idea, right? So there are a couple of versions of 6-man coverages that I want you to understand, right? Send 5 in the blitz, and fire zone is going to be the most popular one. Flores is a huge fire zone guy. All the other kind of classic blitzy defensive coordinators are huge fire zone guys like Todd Bowles and Gerard Mayo. Those guys are all big like fire zone dudes. Fire zone, my understanding of fire zone, what makes fire zone is just that it's 3 deep and 3 underneath. 3 deep, 3 underneath. So you just take the deep shell of cover 3 and marry it to the underneath shell of cover 4, right? It's those same zone patterns. And you just kind of have 3 deep, 3 under, right? That sort of shortcut of saying, well, what if we just stapled the deep part of cover 3 to the shallow part of cover 4? Or if we stapled the deep part of cover 4 to the shallow part of cover 3, you get what's called palms. Now, if you're doing that math in your head, you might be like, wait, didn't we just kind of double book our cornerbacks a little bit? And yes, you did. But the way that palms is, this is the way that I think of it, by the way. Nobody teaches it this way. Okay. Do not quote me. Nobody will teach a cornerback to play palms, be like, well, you have the deep and the underneath responsibility. The way this works is the middle 4 players there. So the 2 deep safeties that are the inside guys have very similar cover 4 responsibilities as they would in just like normal cover 4. And it's the same thing for the underneath 2 guys. They have what are called hook zones. We'll get to it. But the 2 linebackers will have like normal hook zones where they're kind of getting to like the hash or the numbers, or it depends on where the ball is or where they want to be. But they're usually covering some patch of grass, right? And waiting to see which route is going to come that way, and then trying to play it either by watching the QB's eyes or playing tight to routes, or then you get all these stylistic differences on what you actually want the guy to do, right? I'll call it the gimmick of palms is the outside corners. They play a deep responsibility. So you have cover 4 and then 2 underneath and inside zones. You leave the flats completely uncovered, and the corners just play super aggressively underneath. They don't back off in the way you would in like true cover 4. They play underneath a little bit. So it almost starts to look like this like hexagon thing where you have these two deep safeties that are sort of inside, that are squeezing inside, and then you have two corners that are like halfway between the deep zones and the underneath zones. And what they're doing really is, hey, if there's a vertical route, you take that vertical route, right? If there's a go ball down the sideline, you take that and you don't think twice about it. But if you feel anything breaking off underneath, you're allowed to put a foot in the dirt and drive on it. And if you do that, then the safety on your side needs to realize that he now has deep half responsibility. So it's not like cover 6, which is cover 4 in one half and cover 2 in the other half. It's cover 4 that can morph into cover 2 on either side of the field, maybe both sides of the field if it needs to. And the Vikings use that a lot when they want to send 5, which they kind of like to live in a 5-man rush. They like to live in these 6-man coverages and not use them as like, an occasional aggressive play call. They like to use it as a bread and butter, which is why they get such high blitz chances. But to them, it's kind of their vanilla pass rush. So they love to live in this palms thing. And if you want to answer our pass rush by throwing a quick bubble screen to the outside, Byron Murphy can put a foot in the ground and go make the tackle. Those are the basic shells. And if you want to go to 5-man coverages, because we're blitzing 6, you can do that, right? You can do 3 deep and cover 3 and then cover 2 underneath. You just have 2 guys split the underneath part of the field, or you can do that the other way around if you want, and so on. And if you got 4 guys on the field, we'll talk about that in the man coverage thing, because at that point you can't really zone. But let's next talk about what actually happens in each of those zones. And when you start to envision mixing and matching them between all these coverages, that's when stuff gets really fun. That'll be next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Do you think the Vikings are going to have a winning record next year? Don't take my word for it. Put your money where your mouth is. Check out FanDuel. If you're new, you can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. You can even take something with super, super short odds, and assuming that it does win like it's super favored to, you won't get the pennies on the dollar that short odds usually give you. You can get $150 in bonus bets by just winning a $5 bet. So whether it's Vikings over 8.5, whether it's some super conservative same game parlay for week 1, and you just got to wait for it, something like Justin Jefferson's yardage total over, which is 1,300.5 again, or something else similar. I think JJ McCarthy's is 3,550. Anything over, under, whatever you like about that, you can check it out at FanDuel. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. I hope this one's meaty enough for you. Okay, this is a chunky pod. Let's talk about the actual jobs that these guys do in coverage and the requirements therein. So in each of these coverage shells, I've said things, we can kind of divide these zones into categories. They're not always going to be the same depending on down and distance and situation and matchup and all these little tiny details and tweaks that make this a super rich and interesting and colorful system. But we can at least talk about the basics. So I've divided these jobs into some basic ideas. You have a deep half zone, a deep third zone, a deep quarter zone, and inside and outside are a little bit different. You have the flats, and then you have hook or hook to curl zones, which are, there's like middle hook, and then but like I'll say underneath and middle zones, and I'll just kind of lump them all into one category. Those are the sort of zones, and then you have your man coverage responsibilities. Put those aside for now. We'll get to them at the end. I guess the best place to start is with the deep zones. If you're playing a deep zone, you are always going to be playing half, third, or quarter. There's nothing else that happens in a deep zone. Middle third is in cover 1, you play middle third. You don't necessarily go too far to the outside until the ball has already been thrown. You play middle third technique, which is the same thing. So middle third means get to the quarterback. You get to where the ball was snapped, or you get to the quarterback's launch point, and essentially get as much depth as you can from there and try to break on the ball when it is thrown. So that means that wherever you start from, if you're playing middle third, and this is where Brian Flores messes with it, right? Most of the time, if you're playing middle third, somebody has lined up deep already. Maybe they're lined up looking like there's 2 deep safeties and one of them is going to rotate to the middle, but they're already deep. Brian Flores says, nah, F that noise. You can come from anywhere. You can be lined up in press man, and we're going to send you to middle third. You can be lined up over the A-gap ready to blitz. We're going to send you to middle third. You can be looking like a half safety. You can be looking like a cover 3 cornerback, and we're going to rotate everything and go to middle. We're going to go from anywhere. And so it basically makes it so that what you see pre-snap is completely worthless to the quarterback. That's the idea, that the quarterback is going to take in all this information, and whatever the quarterback likes to do pre-snap, that includes the information you could get about man zone indicators from motion. That includes, anything that the quarterback wants to do pre-snap is just totally useless to them unless they can figure out the patterns, and the whole thing is designed so that you can never figure out the patterns. The best way for you to have success against the Vikings is to essentially guess where they're blitzing from and throw it over the top of those blitzes. That's how the Lions got the Vikings go for the last 4 matchups. And the way that, teams that have had the most success against Brian Flores have basically just had to tell the quarterback to wait until post snap, everything declares, and then find the open guy and hope that you don't have a dude rushing down your face while you do that. That's a really difficult thing to do. And it's why quarterbacks who aren't of the upper echelon struggle against the Vikings more than they struggle against everybody else. The Vikings have this sort of pattern where Jared Goff and Matt Stafford do great against them, but Justin Fields struggles in particular against them. And when they do get to go up against Mac Jones and Will Levis, they really put the screws to them. They give Will Levis the worst game of his year. They give Mac Jones the worst game of his year, that kind of thing. That is the point of all this. So if you are in middle third, you are usually opening your hips to try to get to that central landmark, which means you're opening your hips to the inside. That means you start square. You start with your hips facing the line of scrimmage, totally parallel to it. And then when you get the snap, or even before the snap sometimes, you open your hips to the way you need to go. Once you get to your landmark, you square back up, eyes on the quarterback, and you wait for where the ball's going to go. You read the routes and you jump the route you're supposed to jump, or you do whatever you're supposed to do from there. On the outsides, deep third just sort of becomes man coverage a lot of the time. You just are responsible for anything deep into the outside. Where the difference is between inside and outside, you can call that the inside of the numbers. You can call that the hash, or, dead between those two, or whatever you want the landmarks to be. Again, that varies a lot. Scheme to scheme, playbook to playbook, game plan to game plan even. But you have anything deep into the outside, which means that if you're lined up against a receiver and that dude just runs a deep route, you just got it. You just take it. You're in man coverage now, and congratulations. The difference is when you're in deep third, you get to play super over the top because you have, if it's cover 3, theoretically you have 2 helpers underneath. You've got a flat guy and a hook guy. So you can play over the top of anything, and essentially if they're going to try to run like a curl or a comeback against you, ideally there's a zone defender underneath waiting to pick it off. Let's talk about those other zones. So flat is probably the easiest thing that corners have to do when it comes to zone coverage. That means that you're just responsible for the flat. Anything deep, pass it off to the guy behind you. You don't have to do anything. This is how a lot of teams attack the Vikings offense, because if you put somebody in a flat responsibility, have them line up in press against Justin Jefferson or Jordan Addison, they can go for the most aggressive jam ever, and it doesn't matter if they whiff and get beat deep, because that one's going to be someone else's job anyways. And if it's an underneath route, a lot of times just the jam itself can get rid of Jefferson and Addison's opportunity to put wiggle on the release or to do any of the fancy schmancy stuff they will do to get open. You can disrupt that timing, and those routes are usually predicated on timing so much that you can kind of win just by making stuff messy, even if you don't make purchase. That's why teams do this a lot with Addison and Jefferson, and why it's so important for the Vikings offense to generate them free releases. It's why there's all the bunches and motions and all the fancy stuff that Kevin O'Connell does. That's why this offense wouldn't work if it was static for this reason. That's why it's not static pre-snap. In the Brian Flores defense, playing flat is a little bit more than just, hey, you've got whatever outside routes, break short into the outside or whatever. A cover. This is why Mike Zimmer said that famous line, you can find a cover 2 corner at 7-Eleven, because flat responsibilities for corners are notoriously easy. You don't need to cover any routes deep. You don't need to worry about anybody breaking any routes. You just cut under anything and you jump anything quick and outside. You try to jump the route and get that cool pick six, right? But in the Flores defense, because the Flores defense practices so much against quick game, against bubble screens, tunnel screens, quick outs, quick slant flat, that kind of stuff. It's really important for corners in that flat responsibility, which will be their job in cover 2 and in cover 3. It'll be a linebacker's job in cover 3, and he's got to get out there and do this job. My bad. But that's why it's so important for whoever's in that flat responsibility to be able to put their foot in the ground and get downhill. So when we talk in like draft season about, okay, what does Brian Flores want in a corner? Okay, well, he wants somebody who can trigger and get downhill. You might remember me talking a lot about that with Malachi Starks and Nick Emenwari, who Emenwari, I think, was the one who I didn't really like his ability to do that, and I kind of thought the Vikings were going to pass on him because of it. A lot of people got mad at me and told me that they would circle back to that video when Nick Emenwari was like a Vikings Pro Bowler or whatever. I look forward to hearing from you never. But that was the point that I was making, right? That you have to be able to put a foot in the ground and really accelerate quickly downhill and go make a tackle in open space against a shifty, could be a running back, could be a Rondale Moore type, or like a DJ Moore type, maybe is a better thing, like type of like shifty yards after the catch guy, or maybe a big tight end. You got to be able to make all of those tackles, whether they're big or quick, and have that sort of physical presence. Not to mention, because you're not backing off deep, you also have an important run responsibility. It's, you're not going to back your way out of the run fit off the snap and then have to work your way back in. You're already going to be right there. So you become a contained player a lot of time in cover 2. And those things are inextricably married. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And then you have the hook to curl zones. So hook to curl or hook zones are, I would say, the classic thing you think of when you think of like zone defense. You've got from here to there and anything up to 7 or 5 yards or whatever the yardage is that separates deep from shallow. You've got from, this landmark to that landmark, and that, like, this is your area, right? This is where you go. And usually there's a landmark that you're supposed to drop to. I'm not talking about your like old school's spot drop 1980s defense where you would just go to that landmark, put your eyes on the QB and like cook from there. I am just saying that there is a sort of idea of a place that you want to drop to, and then you adjust it as the routes come. So if you are supposed to drop to, say, the top of the numbers and to 5 yards, let's say, or top of the numbers in 10 yards. That's where you're supposed to, like, the literal top of the like painted numbers on the field. And at 10 yards, and that's your landmark. And then you see 2 routes that, like, one is at the top of the numbers and one's going to the dead center of the field over the ball. You're going to adjust that and then split the 2 routes. And you're supposed to, like, straddle the line between one route and the next, and then use the quarterback's body language and eyes to figure out which one he's going to throw to and break on it accordingly. Or depending on the route concept, sometimes if there's one that's just dead straight in the middle of your zone, you just hug it. Just get right in the middle of it and hug it. Sometimes hugging those checkdowns is really bad, especially if it's something like a concept the Vikings like to use a lot, which is bow, which has like an over the ball route, right? And something that's supposed to get that linebacker to come up and hug that check down. It's like the running back's check down, who cares, right? But the linebacker's going to be like, that's a guy in purple, I'm going to go cover him, and then totally vacate a space behind, and you hit Justin Jefferson on a dig over the top. So hugging that is actually a habit that some people don't like, but it changes, again, like depending coverage to coverage and what kind of team you're thinking, right? In cover 3, you can hug that thing all you want because there's already a deep middle guy that's going to be driving on that. Or in cover 4, somebody might be trying to pick it off as a robber from the other side of the field. Again, you can see how mixing and matching these things can get really complicated for quarterbacks to decipher really quickly, but for the defense, it's all the same. Hey, you're usually the hook to curl in this one. You go deep, safety's going to be hook to curl. Now suddenly guys are coming from different angles, and how to place that ball away from the defender that's covering it isn't what you're used to, and suddenly you can throw a pass that's weirdly outside the frame of the receiver and it gets bobbled around and Josh Metellus picks off Brock Purdy. That's the kind of stuff that you can like create when you mix and match these jobs. The big thing though, again, is that we're blitzing here a lot. And when we blitz and do play man coverage over it, You have to do it a certain way. I'll explain that next on Locked On Vikings. One of the questions that I'll get in mailbags pretty much constantly over the course of the season last couple years has been, why don't the Vikings play more press? Why are the cornerback, you see it on TV, right? The cornerbacks are practically off the screen, and then there's like a little completion in front of them, and it's like an easy 4 or 5 yards all the time. Hey, what gives? Why don't they like move the corners up and play press and take that away? And the answer is they are happy to cede that thing in favor of dissuading from even trying something worse, right? They're essentially taking giving a concession to say, but now you're not throwing deep. And the reason for this, I always look at the 2023 Chargers game, week 3. You might remember Keenan Allen hanging 200 on the Vikings. They tried it. They tried to play press man, and it was Brian Flores being aggressive, right? Brian Flores, press man, blitz all day long. Hey, disrupt the routes, disrupt the timing, beat somebody up, and hopefully make the quarterback wait long enough for this really aggressive blitz to get home. It did not work. I think Justin Herbert put like 450 up on the Vikings. And part of the reason is Keenan Allen's a big guy, bigger receiver, and he can play that physical game off the line well enough. Not to mention his releases are really good anyway, so he can just kind of quickly get out from under. Like, he could beat press coverage. He's made a whole career out of beating press coverage without anyone laying a hand on him. So he could sort of protect the timing from that press coverage. It was like the wrong team to try this against, maybe. And so it meant that you could hit him on a slant over and over and over and over and over again. Like, to a ridiculous degree, right? Because this unorthodox game plan, there was this like hole in it that was just unsolvable the way that they had practiced all week. And the only people would be either if there was like a middle hook defender or something, if they didn't happen to blitz that guy, if there was a hook zone defender, that would have to like chase him down, or it'd have to be like the deep safety coming up from depth. And by the time you even get to him, he's gotten 19 yards and you might not even make the tackle. So you are just exposed to all of these problems. So for that reason, it's really important to understand that when you're in man coverage on these blitzes, press is not allowed. It's one of the few inflexible things on a Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah team that's predicated on flexibility in all facets, from contract structures to, defensive game plan adjustments, to, the depth chart and game to game, like activation decisions. Flexibility is a huge priority in this organization, but in that case, this is a completely inflexible thing. You do not do press coverage. If you were a corner and it was a blitz and you were supposed to play off man coverage, and you decided to go rogue and play press coverage, even if you made the right play, you're probably getting benched over it. Like, that would be an unthinkable mutiny that would make the 2016 Xavier Rhodes relayed the play call thing and then it got blown out of proportion thing look like nothing, right? This would be this would be like the story of the year if you went that rogue. It's that forbidden. And, the reason is that it's too easy. If you play press coverage across the board against a blitz, you need every single one of those corners to win that rep. Otherwise, the entire thing falls apart because it's too easy to get beat on a slant, get beat quick, and now the blitz can't get home. You have to force them to do things fast. You have to force them to do things on your terms. That means that you have to say, hey, if you want to get the ball out quickly, we're going to let you throw 2 yards, but that's going to be your only option. You do not get a quick, 3-step drop rainbow go ball over the top like Kirk Cousins would throw to Justin Jefferson in 2021. You don't get those because we're going to have somebody playing off man coverage just going to back off and pick that thing off. If you want to throw directly to a receiver and have it turn into a yards after catch kind of scramble play, we are going to take you up on that challenge, and anything else either is going to take forever, and now you've got to block up our blitz for real, or is going to run right into the teeth of our defensive alignment. That is the idea. So how do you play it? this is very much a timing thing. So if you're a corner on the outside and you're playing off man, you usually want to line up around 7 to 9 yards, and you have your eyes on your receiver. There's one guy over every receiver. This is like the cover zero or the cover zero look. There will be no deep safety here, which is another reason you can't play press, because if you get beat off the release, and it can be 3-step drop, go ball, touchdown, no matter where you are on the field. The idea is whatever guy you're lined up on, you count 1, 2 after the snap. You count 2 beats. Beats is not a precise unit of time, but this is why they practice it all the time, right? So you count, kind of a bup. And once your 2 beats have passed, you should have an idea of what your receiver is doing. If he is releasing vertically at you, you better start backing off. But you do not move. You plant your feet in the ground and you watch his hips, because the hips don't lie. Shakira. And you wait to see what he's going to do. If he's coming deep at you, you stay over the top of that thing, because you know there's a blitz and you know that the quarterback's not going to throw to a go ball if there's somebody over the top of him, right? If it's a 10-yard curl or something like that, you can give up separation on that. It's a blitz. They shouldn't have time to time that up. So you stay over the top of that if it's deep. If he breaks it off, you stick your foot in the ground, you trigger downhill. Again, really important for all these corners to be able to do that, to stick their foot in the ground and trigger downhill. If everybody does that across the board well, you've taken away all of the sort of classic options for defeating a blitz, and now they have to play you straight up. And you're not really manoing against anyone's skill set. You're watching, it doesn't matter if that's Jamar Chase on the other side or, wide receiver 5. A vertical stem's a vertical stem. If it breaks, it breaks, right? And you're not trying, there's nothing they can do deception-wise on that, because they're breaking their route or they're not breaking their route, right? And you don't have to do any guessing, use any anticipation, or read into any of the hints that a receiver might give you. So somebody who's really good at running routes can give you all the razzle-dazzle they want. Your feet are planted in the ground until they actually commit to something. And because you're sending, this is where you send a ton. This is where you send 7 people and line them all up on the line of scrimmage, or do all of the unhinged blitzing that Flores loves to cook up. Because you're sending that, time is on your side. So you can play super conservatively and live in a world where you can get beat, but if you lose slow, they're not going to be able to take advantage of it. And those kinds of plays are all over the tape, and they always have been for Brian Flores defenses, where there's space, there's guys streaking open, but it took them too long. And the quarterback is sacked, there was a blitz. It's this devil's bargain that the thing makes. If you want to talk about like true cover one man coverage, we haven't seen as much of that in the Brian Flores world, and that's because he hasn't trusted the cornerbacks to do it. We've had these like old reclamation guys, or Andrew Booth and Caleb Evans's type guys. Like, we've had corners that we haven't trusted, and this is the change I would like to see is more of that. But I don't know if we have the cornerback group again. So we'll see. I don't know. A lot of the YouTube comments seem to think that these guys are going to shock me and be a top 5 unit. So if you guys are right, we'll see more man coverage. But hopefully you learned something from this. Some of this was really basic, but I hope enough of it was like practical enough where it made the wide world of coverages seem a little more accessible. And if you want more details, there's a whole bunch of resources out there. Just ask me. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.